The thing about hip-hop today is it's smart. It's insightful. The way that they can communicate a complex message in a very short space is remarkable. And a lot of these kids, they're not going to be reading the New York Times. That's not how they're getting their information.
My hip-hop will rock and shock the nation. Hip-hop culture is more than music.
Teach the youth and speak the truth. Show 'em what peace can do when they're reached for you.
My hip-hop will rock and shock the nation. Rap is something you do. Hip-hop is something you live.
So hip-hop didn't invent anything, but hip-hop reinvented everything.
Peace and love, everyone. My name is Manny Faces. For 10 years, I covered hip-hop music and culture in and around New York City as an independent journalist and content creator. Despite the attention the mainstream music business started giving to areas outside of hip-hop's mecca, New York remained a thriving, bubbling, evolving artistic and cultural ecosystem. This includes many people and organizations who use hip-hop in incredibly innovative and inspirational ways outside of just making music and entertaining folks. In areas like education, in schools, in youth outreach and counseling, in theater, in science and technology, in politics and activism, hip-hop is a remarkable force, in New York and beyond. The voices of these innovators are as important as ever, especially as corporations continue to strip away hip-hop's wider cultural voice for the sake of profits. Because these innovators know how to use the nation's dominant youth culture in an authentic manner, in ways that can help solve some of our nation's biggest problems. So we need to celebrate and support them, because I believe that hip-hop can save America. And so this podcast was born. Thanks again for joining me as I talk to the folks who are responsibly using hip-hop music and culture to address, adjust, and in some cases, alleviate problems facing our country. Hip-Hop Can Save America is a presentation of the Center for Hip-Hop Advocacy at hiphopadvocacy.org, a nonprofit dedicated to increasing public understanding of hip-hop culture. We're also brought to you by the award-winning Newsbeat podcast. It's hard-hitting journalism, including interviews with thought leaders and activists about the most pressing social justice issues of our time. And it also incorporates hip-hop, with music and original lyrical contributions every episode. Think of it as Democracy Now! And Black Thought had a podcast, baby. You can find Newsbeat by Maury Creative Studios wherever you get your podcasts, or on the web at usnewsbeat.com. Hip Hop Can Save America airs weekly, Tuesdays at 10 p.m. on Bonfire Open Source Radio. With amazing programming like their flagship morning show, TK in the AM, Bonfire Open Source Radio is leading community radio into the future. Check them out at bonfireradio.com or on the TuneIn app. We're also available on most podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Stitcher. Okay, on this episode, we return to the hip-hop education space as I talk with Dr. Andrea Hunt. Dr. Hunt developed and teaches a Sociology of Hip-Hop Culture course at the University of North Alabama. And while she's very much involved with the regional hip-hop community, what I really like about her course and her work is that she's bringing hip-hop into a school with a predominantly white student body, and is in a quote-unquote red state to boot. Of course, we've seen educators using hip-hop in urban and predominantly minority settings with great success, but I was curious to hear about Dr. Hunt's experience merging hip-hop studies in this setting. And as I mentioned, Dr. Hunt also does a great job at extending her connection to hip-hop way past the walls of her classroom, using the culture and associated art forms to improve lives in the communities where it's needed most. All in all, I think you'll be as inspired as I was to hear how she's using hip-hop to inform and inspire folks from all walks of life, in ways that I think can help contribute to an increase in cross-cultural understanding and help repair some of the damage that has been done to our collective social fabric. Here's my talk with Dr. Andrea Hunt. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me today, bringing your perspectives to the table. As many of us, I think, do, we wear several hats. How would you currently define who you are right now from a professional standpoint?
Well, I'm an assistant professor of sociology at a regional institution in the South, and so a lot of my time is spent in the classroom with undergraduate students, and I teach introductory sociology courses, but I also teach our Sociology of Hip-Hop Culture class, which is taught every spring, and that is a new addition to our curriculum at the university. And I also teach courses that are related to family diversity, because inequality is one of my areas of specialization. And so in addition to teaching, I also do a lot of research on diverse families, and I'm also doing research right now on how hip-hop shapes the identity development of undergraduate students and how it shapes their racialized and gendered identities. And then on top of all of that, I am very involved in the community, and I work with at-risk youth. So I go out to juvenile diversion programs, I go out to juvenile detention facilities, and go out to our middle and high schools and work with kids on a variety of topics, from making good life choices to using poetry as an entry point into writing about feelings and how poetry connects to hip hop.
Interesting, very fascinating and noble work. I'll have you know that I am the son of a distinguished professor of sociology. So we have kindred souls.
Yes, exactly.
I want to kind of touch on the Sociology of Hip-Hop Culture course that you teach. What would be your, elevator pitch to describe what that class is about?
A lot of times students think that it's just about music. We're going to go in and listen to music, and that's one part of it. We listen to music every class period, but it's much more than that, because hip-hop is much more than that. And so we are using hip-hop as a way to critically discuss issues in the world around us. And so we're looking at race and gender and sexuality, identity, faith, capitalism, cultural appropriation, and urban policy, all through the lens of hip-hop.
Interesting. What were you teaching, previously or otherwise, and what led you to develop that course?
Well, I teach our sequence in inequality. So I teach our race, class, gender course, which is a course really on intersectionality, and I teach a diverse families course. And so I was already immersed in the literature on inequality and race and gender and capitalism. And I'm a avid hip hop fan since 1988. So I use music in my classes anyway. And I had an opportunity to develop a special topics course, and I thought, wow, this is the time to do this. Some of these courses are being taught at other institutions, and this is an area to get students engaged in, and an avenue for us just to critically discuss the things that are going on in the world around us. And it's a way to hook students in these conversations. And so I had an opportunity to develop the course, and I jumped right in, and the university has approved it to be a course to be offered every spring now.
So in an article I read about your work, it describes how your class looks at song lyrics sort of as a form of journalism, in a way, a method by which artists speak their perspectives or the perspectives of their communities. As an avid hip hop guy myself, I always, I like to talk about the parallels of hip hop being a form of journalism in some ways, particularly in the article I read, the use of Nas's America, for example.
Yes.
What I like about that is that it pushes back against what is often the public narrative that, the rap music does nothing more than glorify negative behaviors or celebrates materialism. How many of your students come in, you said, that they come in thinking it's going to be all about music. How many of the students come in thinking of hip hop in only that kind of pop culture, music genre, radio, rap term, as opposed to the more complex, artistic and lifestyle driven culture that it is?
Most of them come in with familiarity with what is mainstream right now.
Right.
They are very familiar with trap music, because that is what is getting a lot of radio airplay. And so that is their kind of range of experience oftentimes with hip hop. I do have some students that are entertainment industry students. We have a major here for students that are interested in going into production side of the entertainment industry, and several of them are artists themselves. And so they have maybe a different perspective, because they're writers. And so they are looking at other artists who are writers as well, and trying to develop their craft. So they have a little bit of a different perspective. For the most part, though, students don't have as much familiarity with what we may think of as kind of the classics and the foundation of hip hop. And I also have been interviewing students over the last year for my own personal research, looking at how hip hop shapes their sense of self, how they think about themselves as young people today with racialized and gendered identities. And many of them are really familiar, once again, with some of the mainstream artists and don't know kind of the depth of hip hop.
What's the sort of the racial makeup of your school or your class generally?
Well, the university is a predominantly white institution. We have about 70% of our students are white. Most of my classes, since I am embedded within our hip hop community in this area, I help with a lot of our National Pan-Hellenic Council events, and I help with kind of spoken word events on campus. Okay. I'm plugged into some other communities on campus. And so because of that, students see my classes as a safe space to be able to talk about the these things. And so I often get a much more diverse racial makeup in my courses than many of our other professors do. And so this hip hop class, I would say, though, it's still a majority of the students are still white, even though we do have probably a larger number of African American students in the class than many other courses on campus will have.
Right. I think it's one thing I want to ask you about, because I think that a lot of times when we talk about, hip hop ed or hip hop being used in education settings, the thought might be, and for the general public and even for people within hip hop, that this is a inner city thing, that it's an African American or that community is really where hip hop can be integrated into the educational settings. We see great successes at this for sure, but I guess from a perspective of where you're teaching and who you're teaching, I'm curious about that.
Well, the first time I taught, this is the second time I've taught the course. So the first time I taught it, the course was predominantly white because it was a special topics. It was, just kind of word of mouth. And so the makeup has shifted a little bit. But one of the things that I see from those white students is their ability to interrogate white privilege through music, to be able to address racial oppression, exploitation, systematic inequality in a way that maybe they wouldn't in other classes. And so through music, they feel that they're learning much more about social issues that different communities are dealing with in our society. And so we're using music as a way to also facilitate, cross-racial interactions, to be able to discuss these kinds of issues in a way that is also educating students about what is going on in the world.
It's interesting. There's a quote in that article that I had where one of the students said, I quote, "I immediately envisioned the American dream and how it's different because he's black." I guess referring to maybe the Nas song.
Yes.
Can you talk about that, how analyzing the lyrics and the performances are opening up perspectives to people who maybe, again, not from those communities, not really familiar with the plight directly?
Well, we have discussed topics such as, we start with the history of hip hop, and then we are really kind of in this space of talking about race, social activism, and how hip hop can be used in kind of educational settings. And so that's kind of where we have been at the first part of this semester. This week, we have talked about intellectualism and Black male intellectualism in particular. And so for students to be able to see these various roles within hip hop. And so we have compared and contrasted different artists. We have, really kind of taken a step back from our own personal experiences for them to be able to say, what, other people have stories too that are legitimate sources of knowledge. These artists are creative thinkers, they're critical thinkers, and through the lyrics, we're able to see that knowledge production can look a variety of different ways. And so I think for students that are not familiar with some of the lyrics and some of the artists, this has just opened up this can of worms for them where they're hungry for more. They want to know more. They want to know other artists because it's exposing them to a different way of thinking and a different kind of critical thought about the world.
Well, are there any specific instances or students or reactions that you've gotten that, really stuck out to let you know that this is really making an impact in that regard?
We do these lyrical battles every week, and they do this online where they are integrating academic work along with the music that they're listening to. And so we're trying to bridge these different forms of knowledge. And so elevating, the knowledge that is coming out of music as a legitimate form of knowledge and the academic work as this accompanying form of legitimate knowledge. And so every week there's these huge epiphanies that students see. I mean, we had talked about, even white privilege, and we looked at Macklemore's song, and from their vantage point of thinking about as, a white person coming into, social movements and being an ally, what does that look like? And so for many of them, it was these big light bulb moments going off, seeing his song and his video and seeing his a very critical reflection of himself in an industry that he is profiting off of. And so to profit off of this industry and be a part of this industry then means I need to show up when African Americans are being oppressed. I need to use my voice in that platform as well, not just in an industry where I'm making money off of it. And so it has really given students the opportunity to take a step back and go, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing to create kind of greater good? Right. And they all develop an individualized project. I call it the Heart and Soul Project, because I firmly believe that we should not be doing work just to be doing work, that it should have personal meaning for you, because education sticks with you when it has an emotional connection with you. And so they conceptualize an individualized project, and it looks a variety of different ways for different people. But this is giving them some leeway to do something that is really meaningful, that has an impact on their future, that has an impact on other people's future. And so several of the students are really thinking about how can we integrate this into workshops and advocacy work and these greater things that comes out of hip hop.
Oh, that's awesome. We often talk about, I have another podcast where we use hip hop to bring social justice issues to light. So we do interviews with, thought leaders, and we talk about some of the pressing issues of the day. And then we actually invite independent hip hop artists to contribute actual lyrics regarding that topic. So we've covered the true origins of the drug war in America. We've talked about being exonerated from prison and then coming out after spending decades in jail and then not receiving any compensation, things like that. And then what we often tell people who are listening to that podcast is it's great to know about these issues, hear about them, and say, yeah, that's horrible, but it's about the action that's necessary after that. It's taking action.
Exactly. And we bring in, I've got several artists from the community that come in. And so one of the artists was featured in that news article. We're having another artist come in, Lee Murkey, who is just this unbelievable lyricist, is coming in along with the artist that was featured in the news article, C4. And so the students are going to listen to their music. They're going to analyze their music. And then the artists are going to kind of annotate it to see, from this audience perspective, when we interpret lyrics, what was the thought process of the artist? And so I'm letting these guys just, they get to take over. They're teaching the course.
It is.
I get to just be a student in the course. And so it's really, I think, empowering opportunity for our artists in the community as well to say, I want you to come in. I'm going to learn from you. Right. You're going to be the professor because you are producing this knowledge, and you're going to be seen as this legitimate knowledge producer, and you're going to take over the class. And so giving other people some room to lead these conversations. So I'm just facilitating them. I am not the expert. I don't know everything. I'm a fan as well. And so I like to be able to facilitate these conversations and bring in other people to help contribute their expertise as well.
What I love about that is, and of course you referred to Nas, but I know that in the article again, Chance the Rapper, some newer artists and artists that I think some of the overlooked artists when we talk about activism in hip hop or social justice, or people who are doing that work.
Yes.
It's often, and the media puts it out that it's often, you look at the superstars and what are the superstars doing and who's giving money and who's, putting their voice behind a cause. But coming from New York City area, there's so many hip hop oriented artists and activists that are on the ground, doing work in the communities, bridging those gaps. There's a couple of people out here passed away, a guy named Majesty and a brother named Hassan Salam. When they organized a album release party, they brought in social justice organizations. They brought Cop Watch, for example, which is an organization that looks at police brutality, to set up a table in the album release party at Webster Hall in New York City. So I think that's often overlooked, that the new artists, that young artists, that non-superstar artists are actually out there putting in that work. And to bring them into the classroom and letting a new crop of students understand that this isn't an old school thing. This isn't just when Public Enemy and KRS-One were doing it, that there are artists that are concerned about these issues today.
Exactly. And I show some clips and tell some information about an artist out of Chicago. Her name is FM Supreme. Love her so much. An amazing female MC, but she's also boots on the ground in Chicago and working on ending youth violence. She has developed mentoring programs. She's been all over the world spreading these messages of peace. And so these are artists that a lot of times our students are not familiar with. I also share a lot of information about Indigenous artists, and because we're not as familiar with artists from other backgrounds. And so a lot of students really think about this as this African-American experience, but there's also Indigenous artists and First Nation artists that have been doing this work as well. And their lyrics and the stories that they're telling really parallel oppression, really parallel these stories of state-sanctioned violence. And so to be able to see these from different perspectives. And so the indigenous artists incorporate traditional Native American rhythms and beats and instruments and ceremonial dress in with, scratching and emceeing. And so it's this really phenomenal kind of cultural experience to be able to see.
That's interesting. And that's important as well. When you started developing this course, I guess, we hear often, particularly with institutions or, institutions of higher learning, traditional institutions that have, difficulty opening their arms to this kind of work. Did you have any hindrances? Did you have any problems with the institution or with anybody, or were there any problems that you encountered trying to incorporate hip hop into your curriculum?
I have not had any problems at all. And I think a part of that really goes back to nurturing relationships and collaborations, not only with the institution that I work with, but with people in the community. Right. And so this has been this endeavor, this journey, what I call it. These students are on this journey with me. And so there was a group of students who started it last semester or last spring, and they were the kind of the foundation. And we were just trying to see, is this something that would work or not? And their excitement really showed me that we need to push through with this. And so I tied this course to the overall kind of goals of our institution and said, this is going to help us meet these goals. And so not only is it going to help us meet these goals on campus, but it is a form of outreach in the community. And so I've worked really hard and really strategically with key community partners to help facilitate this. And so I think you've got to have that buy-in from not only students, but you have to show the institution that it is viable, that you're going to have students that come out for this, but also show the community that I'm not trying to stake that I'm the expert here, that they are a part of this as well.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. That community involvement is vital. So you're at a collegiate level. It's sometimes different. There have been many efforts, I guess, incorporating hip hop in education at the middle and high school levels, both as a vehicle to teach other subjects, which we've seen, again, success at, as well as, a field of study in of itself. Do you think that what you're doing and kind of the success you're seeing could be applied to earlier levels of education? I know that's not, where you're at, but do you see that this could be applied elsewhere?
Definitely. I've worked with middle and high school youth using kind of making the parallels between poetry and hip hop. And so I think there's definitely some room in those middle and high school years to be able to do this. K through 12 teachers are much more constrained with what they have to do than we are at the collegiate level. And so it's really finding ways that you can tie this into the core competencies that you need to achieve at the K through 12 level. The greatest success that I've really had with the middle and high school youth is being invited in to do writing sessions. And so I've worked with youth that are out at a residential facility, and we did the parallels between poetry and hip hop, and we had them write, and they wrote, and I told them to write from their heart. 9 young men got up and read their poems, and some of them, kind of had a little flow with it too, which is, even better. But 9 young men that are detained got up in front of a room full of 50 other people and read words from their heart. And so this is life-changing for people. This summer I'm partnering with our local library, our Florence Public Library, and doing a workshop with teens doing something very similar. And so I'm going to bring in some local artists, and we're going to have a writing workshop to think about writing as this tool for expressing emotion, for creative thought, for critical thinking, and then do, maybe a battle, a rap battle as a part of that.
Nice. What do you have planned, I guess, as now this is the second iteration of the course?
I've brought in artists. I've had other guest speakers. I partnered with our Department of Art to help create an exhibit in their gallery space where students and alumni and faculty were doing graffiti and street art. And so we've been expanding into other departments, which has been phenomenal. So after this semester, I have to take a step back and go, what do I want to do for the next time around? And so it's bringing more people in, including other kinds of artists, refining things more and more and more so that this continues to be an engaging experience and a timely, current experience for students.
Are you getting members of the community involved, not involved, but, are you putting on any of these things that you're doing go out to the general public, not necessarily the students or these groups, but kind of just, parents or community members in general?
Yeah, so we had a talk by one of our Department of Art professors on the history of graffiti and street art and its integration within the larger hip-hop culture, and this was community-wide. One of our professors in the Department of Communications did a talk on Two Live Crew and the court cases around that, and it was widely attended, and so that was open to the community. So we've got some brown bag kind of lunch discussions coming up throughout March that are open to the community. And then in April, we're doing an urban art expo that will be a part of this class, but that's a part of the larger community.
Okay, that's good stuff. Listen, you've broken down everything you're doing and why it's so important. I love what you're doing. I'm so glad that you were able to explain some of this and pass along some of this work that you're doing. I only have one more question, I guess. The name of this podcast, and my theory, is that hip hop can save America. Now, this may be a lofty theory, but in your experience, can you sum up, why is it so important, or what are the best reasons to consider hip hop music and culture when looking for ways to, truly improve lives and livelihoods and communities and relationships in this country?
Well, I'm going to read you a little excerpt that I have on an article that's going to be published soon. It says that hip-hop is an expression of community needs, serves as a tool for social commentary, and influences the larger popular culture. This has been at the core of hip-hop since its inception. It also facilitates lifelong teaching and learning through the production of knowledge and creates writers and thinkers. Whether you are an artist or a fan, music inspires critical and creative thought about our own lives and the lives of others. This is the promise of hip hop.
Okay, I'm done here. That's it. That's it. Well, I thank you again personally, obviously, as an advocate for hip hop music and culture, and being someone that's really looking to tell these stories. Again, thank you so much for your work, for your time, for your perspective, and I hope to follow your work and we can stay obviously in touch. Keep this stuff going. Yes,
of course. Thank you for having me on.
Hip Hop Can Save America is a presentation of the Center for Hip Hop Advocacy at hiphopadvocacy.org, a nonprofit dedicated to increasing public understanding of hip hop culture. We're also brought to you by the Newsbeat podcast, hard-hitting journalism, including interviews with thought leaders and activists about the most pressing social justice issues of our time. It also incorporates hip-hop with music and original lyrical contributions every episode. Think of it as Democracy Now! And Black Thought had a podcast baby. Find Newsbeat by More Creative Studios wherever you get your podcasts or on the web at usnewsbeat.com. Hip Hop Can Save America with Manny Faces airs weekly, Tuesdays at 10 p.m. on Bonfire Open Source Radio. With amazing programming like their flagship morning show TK in the AM, Bonfire Open Source Radio is leading community radio into the future. Check them out at bonfireradio.com or on the TuneIn app. Hip Hop Can Save America is created and hosted by me, Manny Faces. I also produce the theme music. Special thanks to our associate producer, Summer McCoy. You can find out more about me at mannyfaces.com and find out more about Summer's hip-hop and tech-related initiative, Hip Hop Hacks, at hiphophacks.com. Thank you for listening.